to the Coders Campus podcast, where you'll learn how to code from one of the best teachers in the industry. Whether you're an absolute beginner or a seasoned pro, the Coders Campus podcast will teach you what you need to know to master the art of programming. And now, your host, Trevor Page.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, my fellow coders, welcome back to the Coders Campus podcast. This is episode 16, and this is where we are going to be continuing our conversation about Amazon Web Services, or AWS. Specifically, today we're going to be diving into Elastic Beanstalk, which is what I promised we would talk about in the last episode. So, essentially, again, a quick recap. Elastic Beanstalk is essentially what we use to launch an instance into the cloud. And by instance, I mean an actual server. So essentially what's going to happen here is that we're going to, sort of create or talk about creating a virtual server in the cloud that will be running a Tomcat server. So this typically, what happens and what that means is that you're going to create a Linux server with about a gig of RAM. And this, Linux server with a gig of RAM is typically known as a T2 micro instance. Okay, T2 micro, and it's part of Amazon's free tier offering. So, if you want to go ahead and do this, which I'm going to sort of try to talk you through it, obviously the show notes are available via coderscampus.com/16, but I think that the main bulk of the post is going to be all in one URL. It's going to be coderscampus.com/15. But if you go to coderscampus.com/16, I'll just have a link that will point you to the episode 15, which is where all the show notes will exist. Cool? Because it's going to be the ultimate guide, if you will, to Amazon Web Services. So it's all going to be available via one main URL. Anyway, that is neither here nor there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be creating the server. So in order to do this, you need to obviously log into your Amazon Web Services account, your dashboard, if you will. And what you need to do is navigate to the Elastic Beanstalk application. You can do this by going, as of the posting of this particular podcast episode, it's in the top left, but who knows what will happen with Amazon Web Services and any changes they make to their UI. But right now, there's a services tab, a services menu, and it's in the top left-hand corner, and you can click on it, and it'll sort of show you all the different offerings that they have, one of which is Elastic Beanstalk, and it's within the compute category. Again, as of the time of this posting, the compute category is like the very first one that shows up, and Elastic Beanstalk is like number 4 in that list. So it's high up in the in terms of the order of the products that they give you access to. So I can only assume that the higher up it is, perhaps the more important it is, because it doesn't look like stuff is in alphabetical order at all. So I'm assuming, the further, the closer it is to the top left, the more important it is. That's the way I see it anyway. So once you go ahead and click on the Elastic Beanstalk, you'll be presented with a generic getting started screen. So pretty much all you need to do is either there's, 2 buttons you can click on. One is the create new application button. Another one is called get started, whatever. All you're doing is you're getting started with Elastic Beanstalk. You're going to create your very first environment. And what's kind of cool, what's neat is they sort of change this around a little bit. It used to be that you had to put in a lot more details when you were creating your instance. They hit you with a lot of overwhelming information that as a newcomer to AWS, I didn't know what the heck I needed to do. So what's nice is they kind of got rid of all that complexity. And now you really only have to fill out maybe 2 things and maybe make, one other choice, if you will. So it's really quite simple. So basically when you get started with Elastic Beanstalk, what you're going to do is you're going to be presented with a screen where you need to specify essentially 3 things. First is the name of your application, okay, which is, it's going to be what it's going to show up as in certain menu items and everything. I don't think it's going to be visible to the client side. I don't think that the users of the app will actually see the name. So it's really just for your own internal purposes. But this is typically, you use the name of your product or the name of the project or whatever it is that you're working on, whatever you named your project in, your Java project or something like that is what, typically people would choose. But, it's free license to do whatever it is that you want in terms of naming. Next up is the more important choice, which is choosing your platform. So there's a big list of different platforms that you can use. I think I briefly mentioned them in the previous podcast episode, in episode 15. But I think, the main one that we want to be looking at is the Tomcat instance. That's their platform, I should say. That's the platform we want to choose because that's what we're going to be using to launch our application. So, and then finally, you can choose to launch either a sample application or you can choose to sort of upload your own WAR file. WAR being WAR, which is essentially a web archive file. At least I think it's called web archive, is what it stands for. I could be mistaken. But that's essentially the file that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, perhaps in the next podcast episode. But for now, we're going to start out by choosing the sample application option. Okay, so that's just one of the radio button options that you can choose. So that's it. Those are the three things you need to do to get started. You need to specify the name of your application, choose your platform, and then choose whether or not you're going to upload your own project file or if you're going to just start with a typical sample application. So there you go. You fill out those options. We're going to, like I said, create our own sample application, or rather we're going to choose their sample application, not create our own. And then you're going to go ahead and, click the start button or create application or whatever it is that you need to do to get the ball rolling. And it will, get to work and it'll start, creating your environment for you based on the options that you chose, which really is just the two options of the platform and the type of application you're running. Or that you're launching. So it will then go hard to work creating your application. It takes about 10 full minutes for the whole process to complete. Again, as of the posting of the show, that's how long it took. So it's, it's a little while. So you might want to get up and grab a bite to eat or, do something else because it's not very, titillating to sit there and stare at the the log, going through and creating the environment. Unless, it's really novel to you. Perhaps you want to sit there and watch it. Up to you. Once it's done, though, like I said, you don't have to sit around and look at it. It's perfectly fine to walk away because once it's done, it will boot you into a different screen, which is essentially a screen that you're going to become very familiar with, which is the screen that you're going to use to manage your instance. Okay, so there's four main parts to this screen. I don't even know what to call it. This is essentially your application view, perhaps. I don't really know what to call the screen, but essentially this is where you're going to see a snapshot of the most recent events, which is essentially kind of like a high level what's going on inside of your log file. It's going to pick some, talk about some high level stuff that's happening with your environment in the past, 5 or 6 events that happened. It'll show you. It shows you the health of your application, so you can see if it's okay, if it's in a warning state, if it's in a severe or degraded state. Who knows? You'll see it there. It shows you the actual URL for your environment. It shows you the current version of your application that you're running. That kind of thing. So yeah, like there's 4 main areas that you want to make note of on this screen. The first is the actual the region that you've selected. So it's in sort of the top right hand corner. You can choose different regions for your environment. I chose North Virginia, which is essentially US East 1. That's East region, and I think there's a few different East regions that you can choose, but the North Virginia is region 1 or US East 1. So it's important to note that is the region that you chose, because if you switch regions, if you switch to one in Asia or one on the West Coast or perhaps one in central Canada, who knows, whichever other one you choose, you're not going to see your Elastic Beanstalk stock application anymore. So the one that we just created, you won't see that in that other region, because you can deploy different applications in different regions. It completely depends on how you want it to accomplish whatever solution you need to accomplish. But typically speaking, you launch one application in one region, and then there you go. Unless you have a really big enterprise application where you need to really have a lot of replication of environments across many regions, then it's not really that big a deal. You pick a region and you stick to it. I think the North Virginia region, for me anyway, was the cheapest one in terms of dollars per hour for all of the server and databases and stuff like that. I'm not sure if that's cheapest because of the way that they set it up, or if it's cheapest because I'm close to it. In terms of I'm on the East Coast, I'm not sure. I think it's because of their own hardware, their own setup. The way that they built their servers in North Virginia, I guess, was pretty cheap, or they were able to do it in a fairly cheaply. So that tends to be the cheapest for that you can choose, which is another reason why I choose that region. So that's one area on the screen that you need to make note of. Another area is the actual URL that shows up. So once your application is done being built, you'll have access to a URL where you can click on it, and it will actually bring up your environment. You'll be able to see your sample application. So mine is just called, sample environment dot a bunch of letters and numbers dot US East 1, because I'm in US East 1 region, dot elasticbeanstalk.com. So you see, it's not a very shareable URL. So that's something that we're going to be getting into later, where I'm going to show you how to map a shareable URL that points to your application, so that you don't have to say, hey, mom and dad, go to sample-environment.7tgekj whatever .us east 1 .elasticbeanstalk.com. It's like, that's just ridiculous, right? So in any case, you have that URL there. You can click on it, and it will actually bring up your environment. So you'll be able to see your sample application running on the interwebs. So that's pretty cool. And then you can also make note on that screen of the actual version that is running, and you have an upload and deploy button where you can upload and deploy new versions of your application. So yeah, right now we're just running the sample application, but you can at any point click on the upload and deploy button and deploy a WAR file of your own, which again we're going to be talking about in a future episode, how to deploy your very own application to the Amazon cloud. So there you go. Once it's done there, you've got the screen that I just talked about, the main application overview dashboard screen, whatever you want to call it. You can click on the URL, and you'll see your actual your sample application in all of its glory. So essentially, the sample application that they run is just a static HTML page, I think. And it just says congratulations on it, and there's some links to say what's next and what you need to do in terms of, how to deploy your own code, how to, create new application versions, talking about the toolkit for Eclipse. You can download a toolkit, an AWS toolkit, and that kind of thing. So it's just a static page that is launched. Nothing really to write home about, but nevertheless, kind of cool that you've now got your own environment up and running. So you basically just launched your own Linux server with Tomcat installed on it. It's now running the sample application, which you can visit via the public URL. Like I said, if I were to give you the URL, you'd be able to go to it and see that the environment is running, potentially, unless I decided to take the environment down. I'm sure eventually, over time, I will, because I don't really think that there's going to be a lot of value in me leaving that environment up and running, because I'll end up having to pay for it eventually. But, before we sort of jump into what needs to be done to launch your own code onto this server, this Linux server that we launched, I want to talk a little bit more about some other sort of important configuration options that go along with this sort of cloud environment that we've launched. So what you can do is on the screen, there's along the left-hand side of the screen, there's some, I don't know if you can call them tabs or links or menu items, whatever you want to call them. But essentially, one of them is called configuration. So if you click on configuration on the far left of the screen, it'll take you to, surprise, surprise, the configuration page. So on this configuration page, you can actually see a few, I don't know, you can call them cards or boxes or what have you, where you can, change a few of the configurations, which were by default chosen when you deployed your environment. So previously, like I was saying, before the Amazon Web Services made this change, you had to go in and you had to set up all these configuration options on your own. Before you'd actually be able to launch your application, and that's where it took a lot of time in order to get going, because you'd be overwhelmed with all these options, right? So now what they've done is they've just set a bunch of defaults. So it's kind of like Spring Boot. If you remember talking about Spring Boot and whatnot in the I forget which episodes we talked about Spring Boot in. I think probably one of the first episodes of the Coders Campus podcast. But it chooses sensible default options for you that you can now change to your liking as you go into the configuration screen. So the first thing I want to do in this configuration screen is to change the type of instance we're running on. So I think by default it will choose the T1 micro environment, which is fine. It's it's a free environment, but I think the T1 micro is actually an environment where you only get I think 500 megabytes of RAM, and you can upgrade to the T2 micro. So from T1 micro to T2 micro. The T2 micro environment gives you an extra 500 megs of RAM. So you get 1 gigabyte, 1 full gigabyte of RAM to work with. And it's still on the free tier. Okay, you can still use it for free. You won't be charged anything to use that for the first year. So, bigger is better, right? More RAM is better than less RAM. So let's go ahead and we can dive into changing and talk about how to change the instance over, which again is very simple. Amazon Web Services tried to make it as simple as possible to get this work done so that, like I said, we can get to what really matters, which is the code. All right. So in any case, there is a little gear icon sort of in the top right-hand corner of the instances box. Like I said, there's a bunch of boxes in the configuration screen. Once you see it in front of your face, it's quite obvious this is what you need to click on to modify it to, configure the individual, let's call them instances settings. So once you click on that, that'll open up sort of a new window. And in this new window, which is sort of the instance configuration, options screen or something, you'll see at the very first thing you can change is the instance type. So it's a sort of like a drop-down combo box, if you will. So when you click on it, you'll see that currently you're assigned to a T1 micro instance. You just scroll around so you find a T2 micro, and you can choose that guy. And then you've chosen it. Great. Then you can scroll down and click Apply. So there's a button the bottom right-hand corner that you can apply your changes to. So you click on Apply once you've selected the T2 micro. And here's where you don't actually have to be too worried about what you just chose, because it gives you another screen, like a warning screen that says, hey, here's some warnings that you should take into account before you really do apply the changes that you just said that you wanted to apply. So when you choose the T2 micro instance, right now, with, like I said, at the time of this posting, it'll give you two warnings. One is that the option that you chose won't take effect immediately. So what's going to happen is each of your existing EC2 instances is what they're called. The EC2 instance is the actual server that we just set up, which is like the Linux server. So each of the EC2 instances, the Linux server, will be replaced with your new settings, and then it'll take effect once they've applied those settings. And essentially the second warning message is saying the exact same thing. It's saying, hey, it's not going to happen immediately. So in other words, what they're saying is, hey, if this is a live environment, there's going to be some downtime. Okay, so it's about 10 minutes of downtime that you're going to have when you're switching between instances. Maybe not exactly 10 minutes, but the whole process takes about 10 minutes to switch over to a brand new instance because, hey, it needs to fire up a brand new server on a brand new instance and do all the work that we just did before. It needs to do it again. Okay, so that's really the warning that you're going to get. If you happen to choose an instance that is not part of the Amazon free tier, you're also going to get that warning message as well. There's going to be a third warning message that says, hey, the instance that you just chose, whatever instance you might have chosen, this does not belong to the Amazon free tier. So essentially what they're saying is you're going to have to pay for this once you click on the, I accept or save button or whatever it is, the button that shows up there to apply, you actually, save your settings. Once you click on it, then, hey, it's going to switch over and you're going to start being billed for that instance that you just chose. But like I said, if you follow my instructions, you'll be able to keep the free, offer, promo in your account. So choose T2 Micro and have at it. You go ahead and click on the save button, and then it'll start firing up the changes. It'll, shut down your old environment and start firing up a new one, and then point all the new security settings and all the new this, that, and, everything that AWS needs to do in the background. All the magic, it's going to do that, and then after about 10 minutes, then your environment will be back up and running, and then you will now have a more powerful instance. You're going to be running on a T2 micro, which is, like I said, about 1 gig of RAM, and you'll have your Tomcat launched, and it will have your sample application as well launched onto that new server as well. So everything that you'd previously set up, boom, it gets taken into account, and it will be applied onto this new instance that you just set up. So it's really quite nice. So for doing things like, imagine how much work and effort you'd have to put into upgrading your hardware. Like if you had purchased hardware and you needed to upgrade that hardware to more powerful hardware, how much of a pain in the butt would it be to have to migrate everything from the old server onto this new server, physical hardware server? Can you imagine how much effort and work that would be? Okay, I'm talking about, using AWS and having it taking 10 minutes or whatever, and how 10 minutes is like, okay, there's going to be some downtime. it's not going to take you 10 minutes to migrate from one physical hardware server to another physical server. Okay, we're talking, if everything goes correctly, we're talking maybe a couple hours, maybe more than a couple hours. If one thing happens to go wrong, we're talking maybe a full day, maybe a full weekend. So the fact that AWS can get it down to about 10 minutes, it really is incredible, the time that we live in right now, to be able to get all that stuff done. Because it's just, I don't know if I can appreciate how powerful, what sort of service it is that they're providing to us, and which is why I'm perfectly fine with paying for it, because I know the headache that I would have if I had to do this myself without the help of AWS. I wouldn't be able to do it. So there you have it. That is how you get up and running with an actual, instance of your own, a Linux box, hosted in the cloud with AWS through Elastic Beanstalk, running a sample application. All right. So now in the next episode, we're going to be diving into the steps on how to prep your code so that your code base is ready to be uploaded to Amazon, and we'll go through sort of the steps that you need to go through in order to upload and deploy your code into the cloud. It's not that difficult, especially if you're running with a Spring Boot application. You're pretty much ready to go. I mean, Spring Boot out of the box, especially with latest version of Spring Boot, it's pre-configured. Everything's just good to go to fully be deployed into AWS. So yeah, if you're using Spring Boot latest version, you're already good to go. That's a little spoiler for the next episode. But obviously, if you're not using Spring Boot, there's some steps that you need to take to get your application ready to rock, and that's what we'll be talking about in the next episode. So, can't see you then. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Again, you can check out the show notes, coderscampus.com/16, which will really just point you to coderscampus.com/15. Anyway, check out the show notes. There's lots of beautiful pictures that I've taken. It took me a while to take all the screenshots and upload them to my blog post, so be sure to check those out. And if you want, leave a comment below in the actual show notes and let me know if this was helpful or not, because, who knows? Maybe this is actually not very helpful over audio. Maybe I need to do something different to help you guys out. But yeah, let me know. I'm always interested in your feedback. So thanks so much for listening. I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode. As always, take care of yourselves. Happy learning, and bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Coders Campus podcast. But before you go, Trevor has a favor to ask you. In order to keep these episodes free, he'd love for you to leave a rating and review the podcast on iTunes. Just go to coderscampus.com/review to leave your own rating and review of the show. So if you have 30 seconds to spare right now, please help out by leaving a rating and review via coderscampus.com/review. It will ensure that you continue to get these awesome free podcast episodes each and every week. So if you like free swag, head on over to coderscampus.com/review. Happy learning!